Everybody. I think morning, everybody. Thanks for joining this morning for this webinar about how to supercharge your hiring process. It's because of the employment law changes, which I'm not going to talk about today. The ability for companies to be able to hire the best talent for their business is even more crucial than ever. So I hope we're just going to spend 45 minutes. I'm going to talk through 5 key steps that make a real difference in the recruitment process. As we're a smaller group, if you have any questions at all, then please jump in. It'd be good to have a bit of a debate. So, and we might get Forbes back, who has had to leave the building because of a fire alarm. So he may well catch up with us. Okay, so there are lots of adages about the importance of hiring, but the cost of hiring the wrong person is so much greater than the cost of hiring the right person. I'm sure we've all sometimes been rushed. We hire somebody that isn't necessarily the right fit, and that the consequences really for the company, for that individual being in the wrong job, isn't great for them. It's not great for the team and can be a huge opportunity cost to the business. Hi, Forbes, you're back.
Yes, the fire alarm has now stopped. So my apologies, everyone. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, no worries at all.
No problem.
I'm sure we've all experienced that situation where we've hired the wrong person and then we've kind of paid the price of that. It is really hard, I think, particularly when you're a small company, to invest the time into the recruitment process to do your best to get it right, because we don't necessarily have lots of resources to kind of cover that vacancy. But the time investment is crucial for that kind of longer term gain. So how would you rate your current hiring process out of 10? When I speak with many of our clients, they go, well, we're probably about a 5. And so there's very often huge opportunities for improvement. The trouble is we don't think about them until sometimes there is a vacancy, and then we get tempted to rush. So it's really helpful to take stock when you don't have a vacancy, to review how do you go about it, what's working well for you and what isn't working well, so that you can kind of diagnose any issues and put them right before you next need to run the process. So we're going to look at 5 steps. Step 1, I know it sounds really obvious, but it's amazing how often this goes wrong. Know what you're looking for. Step 2, eat your ice cream quickly. Step 3, go for a test drive. Step 4, how do you do? And step 5 is a 2-way sale. So I'm going to run through each of the 5. As I say, jump in if you have any questions as we go. We'll start with number 1. So it's really easy for, let's have a think about when we're sitting down and we want to choose something to watch on TV tonight. And we go, I know I want to watch something tonight, but we look and we scroll and we scroll. And we're not sure, and there's loads and loads of choice, but we're just not really sure what we're going to watch. We spend a lot of time and a lot of energy, and sometimes get bored in the process, and end up not really watching anything, or watching something that isn't really what you want. It's very typical in the recruitment process to kind of start the process before we're actually sure what it is we're looking for. What I see happen in lots of small companies is they go for a like for like. So say somebody's left, we'll take my team as an example. Say our HR administrator leaves. It's really tempting to just go, right, we need another HR administrator, and just kind of go quite blindly into that process because you've hired for it before. But that moment where you decide that you need to start hiring is really crucial to be clear about what it is you want, because the world has probably changed since you hired that role last time. And it may be that you need different hours, or actually, do you need a full-time, or could it be part-time? Is the location, could it be working from home? Could it be remote? Or are you very clear that it has to be office-based? But thinking these things through early can help make sure that you are focusing your energy on the potential of the right candidates. Looking at what experience they previously have and what is necessary. Lots of people put in that you need to have this and you need to have that. And actually, when questioned, they don't. So it's making sure that your wish list is exactly what is needed for this hire. What skills do they need? And what approach would you need them to take? And we're going to talk a lot more about approach in a later step. But being clear and being aligned on what really matters in the role will help you know when you find it. We've had a number of processes, even in the last few weeks, where a client, say, may be hiring for a project manager. Is project manager going to be my example today? And the people involved in the hiring process are actually looking for something different. So when it comes to a short list of candidates, they realize that what one person thinks is going to be the right project manager is different to what somebody else thinks. And therefore, they are conflicted when it comes to doing scoring and when it comes to selecting their ideal candidate. So where you have multiple people in a process, it's really important that everybody understands what is the ideal? What is it you're looking for? What are the right answers to the interview questions anyway? And two, what is their role in the process? Very often we find that clients they'll say, oh yeah, we've got 3 interviews in our interview process. The challenge is every interview is exactly the same and no one's really aligned on what the right answer is. That's a huge time investment from the company and a massive time investment for the candidate that's coming and answering the same questions 3 times. So a part of this is about being very intentional about each stage of the recruitment process. So why are you inviting them and what is it at this stage you're going to find out about them? There's a lot to find out about a potential candidate. What is it at this stage that you are finding out so that you can be very clear and that you're not duplicating questions or expecting the candidate to kind of go round the houses again. So being very thoughtful what each stage means and then how you quantify what you've kind of gained from that stage to then be able to compare it to the other candidates. So this is about being intentional, shifting out of cruise control and thinking, right, if we're going to hire again, exactly what is it that we want? Where's the right place to advertise it? This isn't an attraction webinar, but there's a whole other part, obviously, to recruitment. But it is about making sure you're very clear on what good looks like and that everyone is on the same page. Much better find out right at the beginning than at the end. So step 2, I thought this one was quite apt for this week. Eat your ice cream quickly. One of the biggest risks we have when we advertise for a role and we start receiving applications, whether they're from an agency or whether it's through a local advert, whether you're using Indeed, is that we place the advert and then we haven't got time that week because it's been really busy. It's been really busy. I haven't got time to have a look at those applications. Literally, the moment that they apply for the job, their interest starts melting. So if we don't get to those applications quickly, we will have already lost their interest. And by quickly, usually I mean within about 48 hours. So candidates lose interest quickly and they'd be very distracted by other opportunities. Now, if there's someone that's really perfect for your business, yeah, they're really talented, they've got so much to offer, but it takes you weeks to get to speak to them, they will be gone. They'll be gone. Talent on the market does not hang around for very long. And therefore, time is definitely of the essence. We have to respond to their interest before it melts. And that can be a real challenge because, when we hire, if we use Indeed, sometimes we'll get hundreds of applications and we do our best to have screens and filters to kind of limit the responses. But still, you can be inundated. But the challenge is if you don't book the time in your diary to get back to people within 48 hours, you potentially will have lost the best candidates. So it's not just that the pool gets smaller, but also the pool may not be really the ideal profile of a candidate you want because people that are really, really good often just have more choices. It's more competitive. So we have to do our best to get to them as soon as we can. At every single stage of the hiring process, we have to move as quickly as we can because obviously, particularly if they're in multiple recruitment processes, if somebody gets to make them an offer first, it's only human nature that sometimes they'll take that because they're scared they might not get another offer. So that timing is very fragile. We have to be very careful with that time and making sure that people understand, those candidates understand what the process is going to look like, what's the timing of it, what's going to be expected at each stage, so that they can navigate that, because it's not easy, is it, if you're speaking to a number of different potential employers. So they need to know that we're interested. They need to know that we're going to move it appropriately quickly. They need to know that we're not going to waste their time. And that constant kind of communication is really important, and that does take time. And so we have to build the time in. Otherwise, we will just be wasting it and reducing the possibility for us to find what could be the ideal fit. Number 3, would you go and buy a brand new car without taking it for a test drive? I have before, unfortunately, and I regretted it for 3 years. Would you buy a house without going and looking around the house and doing a survey? No, not in a million years. So we have to make sure that we are going for a test drive and make it as lifelike as possible, right? You don't just want to see photos of the house. You want to go and see what the house feels like. You want to go and stand in the garden. You want to go and have a nose around all the nooks and crannies. We need to be able to try and do this in the recruitment process as much as possible. So there he is, going for a test drive. What does a test drive look like for your business? Every business will be different. And so being able to work out what a test drive looks like for each role in your business is really important. So what could you do? If your job advert says attention to detail is really important, then the more that you can provide an assessment stage within your recruitment process to test that, the better. It's very easy to say, I have excellent attention to detail on your CV. It's hard to find a CV that doesn't say that. And then sometimes they use the right grammar and punctuation around it, and sometimes they don't. So if you think about if you hired the person and then they were coming in the next day to work, what would they be doing? The more that you can test for that, the better. So as an example, what we do, where we have HR administrators in our team, obviously the ability to be able to take details from a spreadsheet and populate that into a Word document is crucial. So what do we ask them to do? Take the details from a spreadsheet, put them into a contract, or put them into a letter, and see if they are able to transfer the information correctly, that the formatting is right, that they're paying attention to justification on the formatting. Just making sure that they can do those tasks quickly and easily, and then score them. So we'll have somebody come in and we'll say, right, we've got these 5 contract requests. Can you create the 5 contracts? You've got 25 minutes. They do that, and then we can score them. It means that we can be very consistent in our scoring of candidates, but we also get past that. I've got great attention to detail, because we can actually see if they do. So asking people to kind of transfer information, asking them to be able to create something and see what they pay attention to, whether it's an email or a Word document or whatever, will really help you be able to assess their abilities. Let's take customer service as an example. So if you were hiring somebody that was going to be dealing with clients or customers on the phone, you could conduct a customer complaint role play. So literally, you can take the latest complaint you've had and change the names to protect the innocent, but to say, okay, so if we hired you, what you could face tomorrow is this. Customer, this is the situation. Excuse me. And your role is to do X. Let's just kind of go through that and just see what's their tone and what's their approach. What things do they consider? Yes, you'll have to kind of set the scene and give them enough to be able to think about, but you could give them to that as a pre-read, a couple of paragraphs, and then role play the conversation. The difference between candidates can be incredible. The CVs can look the same, but their approach to that situation will tell you what you need to know. So you could give them a case study, you can ask them to prepare it in advance, or you can put them on the spot and do that, because that is what the reality of the job will be. But then being able to score that after, to say, what did they pick up on? What was their tone like? What were they focusing on in terms of trying to resolve the issue? Then you'll be able to kind of come up with some scores that will help you get past a gut instinct feel for it, to be able to really kind of apply some science. What about sales confidence? We have lots of clients that are trying to hire sales advisors, but kind of business development people, or whether they're field-based or office-based. Ideally, you'd ask them to pitch. So if they're going to be presenting your brand, if they're going to be going out and selling your product, then the more that you can kind of give them some information and say, right, at the interview on Thursday, we're also going to ask you to do a 10-minute presentation where you're pitching this product to this client. Something that really gives them some kind of something to get their teeth into, but then you can see their level of confidence, you can see how they approach it, you can see how skillful they are at being able to align a product maybe with a client. And so that gives you a really good flavor, and it gives you a lot more that you can then interview around, because you say, oh, you really focused on this element. Why was that? Or what would you have said if we'd said this in response? Gives you something you can really kind of peel back and find more detail than you'd ever be able to get in an interview. Because if you say, oh, how would you approach this if you're speaking to a client? Some people are really good at giving you the right answer to a question, probably whilst they're tapping into AI at the same time. But when they actually have to do it on the spot, then that can really demonstrate those that would be able to step up and be successful in that role or not. You can ask them to prepare things in advance and present them to you. If it's a creative role, obviously asking them to send their portfolio to you in advance so that you can review their portfolio, but then question them on it. We've had people come before with a portfolio that we can clearly see they've just taken images off websites and stuck them together. But being able to kind of really be able to test those skills is absolutely crucial. And yet it is such a key step that people miss. I think we get so focused on interviews. People can just be really good at interviews. So the more that you can kind of create this assessment and a pack of kind of assessment tools, whether it's for finance people and analysis of data, customer scenarios, whether when I hire HR business partners, we have some case studies, right? Client phrase with this query, what's your advice going to be? And it's like there's like 8 points that they need to address regarding different legislation, kind of risk mitigating factors, whatever. So we can very clearly see who really understands their employment law and who doesn't. So
Sandra,
yes, Forbes.
just very quickly, and I think you kind of mentioned it a little bit going through there. I can see the sales confidence bits in terms of pre-planning, but do you say to people before they turn up, this is what we're going to do? So, for example, the proofreading, the customer complaint role playing. Do you mix that up in terms of some set of people would say this is what's going to happen, or do you mix it in terms of that spontaneity? How do they immediately react in an interview? And do you find prepping them gives a better response or compared to spontaneity?
So I find that we let them know that there's going to be an assessment so that they don't feel completely ambushed and what the topic will be around. So we might say there'll be an assessment on attention to detail or an assessment on kind of your customer service skills. We don't say specifically what.
You leave it as abstract as that.
Yeah. So if it's kind of a testing a particular skill like this, then yes, because in the role, that's what they'd need to do. Mm-hmm. If though we're asking them to do a presentation, so something that's more they need to think about, you know, what they would do in terms of developing business for that sector. So we've got a company that does stretch and tents like canopies. For them, we send a title to the candidate in advance. Please prepare this title to present for 10 minutes. So that when they're presenting it, we can ask questions around that and see what have they focused on and what haven't they. There's always the risk that nowadays that any pre-work is going to be, you know, supported by AI or their brother who's a brilliant architect or whatever. So presenting them though is more also about their presentation skills, their communication skills, and how they deliver it. And then you kind of interrogate their rationale to make sure that that's definitely their words rather than something that's been provided to them. So the key, though, on that point, though, Forbes, is making sure that obviously make sure the scenarios are as real to life as possible. Sometimes people put in assessments or they use screening tools, but it's not actually really what they'll be doing. And so it might be kind of useful, but get it as close to the reality as possible. But you must give each candidate exactly the same brief and the time to deliver it. To make sure we're being consistent and that we're being fair, that everyone has the chance to show their very best self. We have to make sure that everyone's getting the same prep. So if one person gets 20 minutes to prepare something or 20 minutes on a case study or something, that everybody has to get the 20 minutes so that you don't fall foul of anything. And then score each candidate consistently. So once you've kind of created your case study, doesn't need to take long, sometimes because we are trying to keep it real to life as possible, you should probably have lots of examples of it, but make sure that you understand how are you going to score that. So like my example for the HR business partners, we've got a couple of case studies and, you know, the scores are out of 8. But how many of those points are they scoring out of 8, so that you can be very confident that you are trying to compare apples with apples. So consistency is key. But these things make a real difference. It's fascinating how many times people will say, oh yeah, I'm really good at this, I'm brilliant with customer service, but actually in the moment, they don't have that confidence. It would be so costly to not take that 20 minutes, hire them, find that out, and then have to spend a significant amount of time in investing, or potentially they don't pass their probation, which is no good for anybody. So yeah, doing the test drive will let you know. Okay, step 4. This is the bigger part for this webinar. So we often, when we're doing interviewing, often it's really to say, okay, and what did you do in that job? Okay, and how did that go? And what went really well, or what didn't go really well in that job? And that is interesting. It does give you an insight into how someone's answering the question. However, what can be even more important is how somebody tends to approach situations. So how they do what they do, not what they do, can make the difference between your perfect person versus your not so perfect person. Being able to work out behaviorally how they tend to approach situations makes a huge difference. So I'll give you an example. These are my kids. This is Adam. This is Emily. They're eating their ice cream quickly. They are completely different to each other. So absolute chalk and cheese. Raised in the same home. The genes are all kind of the same, however, completely different. As an example, I said to them the other day, guess what? We're going to Japan in July. It's going to be amazing. Emily says, oh, amazing. Oh, amazing. We can go to the Capybara Cafe. It's going to be brilliant. And we can go and do all these amazing things. It's going to be fab. Adam says, how long is the flight? What will there be to eat? Will I be able to watch TV? What time will we get there? So for Adam, responding to exactly the same point, their response is completely different. They have a completely different focus. And that is about their behavioral style. Yeah. Because I'm a nerd, obviously I've profiled my kids and my dogs. Because their approaches are so different, and that for me requires different parenting, but it's same from an employment perspective. The more that we understand the behavioral profile of the candidate in front of us, the more likely we are to be able to know which bits of the role they might find more challenging, how they're likely to respond in a situation. And that can really help and inform the latter stages of the interview process. So we use a tool called DISC. DISC is amazing. You may well have heard of it before, but the candidate goes on. So what we normally do, we do the first interview and assessment, and then we do the DISC profile prior to the final interview. And this is, the candidate then receives an email from us. It takes no more than 10 minutes. It's force ranking 24 questions, and basically it gives a score on 4 dimensions. So every candidate will have a score on each of these 4 dimensions. So the red dimension talks about how they address problems and challenges. Yellow dimension talks about how they handle situations involving people and contacts. The green, the steadiness dimension, gives them a score for how they demonstrate pace and consistency. And for the blue, the 4th one, the C in DISC, is about compliance and how someone reacts to procedures and constraints. People's scores on these measures is one of the best indicators of how they're going to show up. So I know that if I say to my Emily, who's a high yellow, we're going to go and do this, she's like, yeah, because she's got a really high yellow score. She's like, yeah, loves being around people, loves different things, loves options, loves being able to be, she's very verbal, she's very has masses of warmth. My son, Adam, is a high blue. He's about the logic and the detail. What is happening and when? What is the process around that, so that he can mentally prepare for that? If you put Adam and Emily into the same job, depending on what the job is, one would perform really well and one probably wouldn't, because they are opposites. Yeah. So if I put them both in 10 years' time into an engineering job, Adam will probably smash it. Emily would probably hate it. If I put them both into a sales job, Emily would probably love it. Adam would probably hate it because that's the way their brain is wired. That their behavioral profile is crucial to be able to see what kind of environments they're going to feel really comfortable in, where they can really play to their strengths, versus feeling a bit like a fish out of water. It makes a huge difference. Because when you have the profile, you end up with kind of attributes that people would say their best friends would use to describe them. So Emily is outgoing, enthusiastic, expressive, dominates conversations, very hard to get a word in edgeways, enjoys the limelight, animated, disorganized. I mean, you should see her room. Whereas Adam, information gathering, analytical, quite reserved, introspective, meticulous, identifies the risks, is quite sensitive, rigorous. So who do you want? What kind of person do you want to hire? Being able to use science to be able to give you that insight into what somebody is like when they're in the workplace can be incredibly helpful. I'll give you an example. So say we were hiring for a project manager. So you're hiring a project manager who needs to be, so we need to work out what it is we're looking for. Oh, sorry, I skipped unintentionally. We want to make sure that they are going to be great at leading, so willing to lead from the front, assertive in managing competing priorities, and able to handle client escalations. Yeah, those are just attributes that we need them to have. They need to feel comfortable in those kind of conflict situations, being able to kind of calm things down and lead from the front. The ideal candidate would therefore need to have a dominance in terms of on their red score, which is all about dominance and how you handle conflict. They need to be over the 50% mark. People that are over the 50% mark feel more comfortable with handling potential conflict, being able to kind of handle the risk of that, be able to lead from the front, comfortable in kind of directing and delegating. Whereas somebody with a low red score is far more passive, far more considered modest, peaceful, but doesn't like conflict. So if we put this person into a project manager role, they would probably find it incredibly stressful, because a lot of it may be trying to make sure you're trying to get people to hit deadlines, to move progress along, to be able to deal with any kind of client escalation issues. Because they've got a very low red score, a low red score means they have a tendency to avoid conflict and a preference to follow others. So knowing that is really blooming helpful when you're hiring. Because when I'm hiring a HR manager, if I am interviewing somebody with a very low red score, how will they say to the client, no, you shouldn't do that. No, I need to tell you to stop because this is what could happen. Because we've got some quite feisty, quite dominant clients. If we don't have HR managers that can handle that conversation, has all kinds of manner of risk for my business. So being able to profile a candidate in the final stages means that you would then have, say you've got 3 candidates at final stage, 3 profiles, you'd be able to say, right, what does this one tell me about this person? And what does this one tell me about this person? What does this one tell me about this person? They will have very different scores, probably, on their profile. And from that, we can deduce how are they likely to be able to conform with policy, be able to be analytical, how much are they going to need to be around other people? You know, if you hired a salesperson that really likes being around people, wants to bounce off people all the time, but then put them in a field-based role where they need to drive to Glasgow every Tuesday, actually they'd feel really lonely because they're not getting enough interaction that fills up their battery. So there are so many fundamental questions, and we never ever make a decision just based on the profile, obviously. But goodness, it makes final interviews so much more interesting. Because you can say, talk to me. If we had this profile and we're hiring a project manager, we could absolutely, in the final stage, be talking about, tell me about how you deal with conflict. What kind of the most stressful part of your last role? How did you deal with conflict? And really tap into that to see what do they do to try and help manage that? Because some people will employ strategies to help them be better at it, but it's still an uncomfortable fit. And what you want to do in that final conversation is really be able to explore that and see how well that's going to culturally kind of fit within your team and within the role, because you want to get round pegs in round holes. So this science is really helpful to help make sure that final interview isn't just a recap of the interviews before, but tells you something new, so that when you kind of get into the decision stage, you've got all the information in front of you to make the right decision. I thought
So
you were going to say
I
something cool.
just,
I thought you were going to say something. Yeah.
yeah, it makes me smile in so much as that I can remember, and I've heard this from somebody in the police and also somebody at Doubletree, whereby both the kind of comments when somebody had just joined the police and Doubletree and basically, oh, we didn't think it was going to be as much hard work as it is, and you're thinking the police, it's not going to be that straightforward. Doubletree being in hospitality is quite challenging, but both of them sort of said, oh, it's way harder than I thought it was going to be, and I was just thinking how much this what you're saying is so much common sense, but large organizations, not to be critical of Doubletree or the police, you would think, gosh, could you have managed that a little bit better to dig in to see that resilience or those kind of skills could have been picked up before they were took on the job?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a challenge though, isn't it? I mean, I think work ethic is such a it's such a difficult thing to test for, like how hard someone's going to work. But what I do is when I'm meeting with candidates, we can explain as much as we like that, consultancy is really busy. We could have 5 clients phone with a restructure today, and we will need to manage that, and it will need to be legally correct, and we need to be on it. What I tend to do is therefore say to people when they say, "Oh yeah, well, I'm really good at multitasking, or I'm really, I'm really like being busy." I say, "Tell me about kind of like the craziest time that you had in your last job. What was the last day you felt really busy?" How they explain that to me gives me a good indication of
Yeah.
what busy looks like to them. If they say, "So someone I had to work, 10 minutes late, I had to work an extra 10 minutes just to be able
Oh,
to
I
get
had to
that
work
done."
until 6 p.m.
Yeah. And I'm like, we often work much later than that, and our clients sometimes phone us at night. So it just being able to kind of get them to say, so tell me about what that looked like in your last job, because the way that they describe it, the words they choose, and the example they give will tell you a lot about what that actually means in their mind. And if you say, oh, so you said in your CV that you're really good at multitasking, what were the things you had to multitask between? If they say, well, I had to manage the diary and I had to answer the phone, okay, that's very different to having 15 different stakeholders, or you've got to try and manage everybody. So the more that you can pick up on those kind of generic statements and really probe, and I mean, tell me about that. So what was it about that you found challenging, or how then would you prioritize that? Like you have to dig. It's usually about the fifth kind of layered question that you actually get to something real. The first stuff's all a bit superficial, isn't it? It's the stuff that everyone's practiced and the coaching they've had. It's when you really dig into it that you get a real sense of who the person is and how they adapt to situations and what their natural style is going to be. So we highly recommend using a disc profiling tool. You obviously need to know what it is you're looking at. You need to understand what the dimensions mean, and you need to be able to look at a role and think, what would be the ideal profile for this role? So can somebody be a HR business partner with a low red score? Yes, they can, but there are things that we would need to help catch. It's very important that we know that early doors rather than later on when they've said, oh, okay, yeah, just go and dismiss that person. So, you need to look at a job and go, right, is it ideal that they are above the line on their green or below the line green? Are they above the line red or below the line red? Blue, yellow. Doesn't mean that anyone's ever going to be a perfect fit, but where there's a big difference, that's where you want to spend your final interview. Dig into that, because that is probably what's going to make the difference between them being successful and enjoying the job or being a bit of a disaster. So use a behavioral profiling tool at the final stage. Make sure that you know what the ideal profile would be. What can happen is that a client can use a profiling tool and then they make it fit based on who they actually dislike the most. So there's a discipline to thinking, right, if I'm hiring for a finance manager and they've actually got a very low blue score, what does that mean? How is that going to show up in the workplace? Because usually a finance person would be about a 50 on the blue scale, if not more. So you need to be very clear for each job, what is the ideal profile? So that when you're then profiling the candidates, that you can go, okay, this is what this is telling me. This is where I need to spend my time in speaking with them. use the profile for each candidate to help focus on the final interview, focusing on the differences, and then kind of capturing your thoughts on their answers. And if they say, yeah, I really don't like conflict, but this is what I do to manage it, brilliant. Yeah, but at least you've been able to find that out now, so that you can use in all of that insight that you're gaining at every stage of the interview process. Okay. Step 5 is a two-way sale. This bit really bothers me. Moving for a candidate to choose to leave a job and move to another employer is a massive decision, isn't it? It's huge. You're walking away from potential safety of a role and a salary and everything else into the unknown. And the more, therefore, you can make it feel known to them, the easier it is for them to make a decision to switch. Again, it's like moving house. I can't remember how many times I went back and see the house that I'm living in now, but I went back quite a few times just to check that it was what we wanted. It's a big decision, and therefore, the more that an estate agent can help me feel happy about that choice, the better. So I'm sure, I don't know if you have ever worked in a estate agency, but sometimes they do like a show home where they've just made some bread and there's some lovely flowers on the side, and they set the scene so that you kind of get to see what the house is like at its very best. It's a similar kind of concept. If you want somebody to buy in, if you want them to select you to be their next employer, you need to give them a good reason. So we need to be able to help make sure that the whole of the process is really well managed, but also very mindful of what information can you give them in advance. What does it feel like when they walk in the door for an interview? So we did a piece of work with a client about 9 months ago, maybe, and they sell organic, ethically produced baby products, so hardware and kind of baby clothing and things, but also like actual prams and pushchairs and things. And what we did was we said, right, we are going to do like a fly on the wall of what a candidate's experience was. So we saw somebody applied for a job. How long did it take for them to get to a telephone screen? How long did it take for them to walk in the door? What comms did they get? In the interview, what questions were they asked? Were they asked exactly the same questions the second time around? Yes. But also when they're stood at the door waiting to come in for an interview, what was the reception like? How were they greeted? And what was the interview room like? So what we found was that people were applying for the job. It's taken a long time for them to receive any communication. The communication was quite formal. It was quite wasn't particularly friendly, shall we say. It was just quite transactional. They were invited in for an interview. The interview, they had to go to a door, but you weren't really sure that you were at reception. So when they got in the door, they went down a grey kind of corridor into a very grey room that didn't really have anything on the walls or anything, and they had their interview. What they were finding was their conversion of offers and acceptances was low. So what did we do? We said, right, okay, this is now how we're going to do it. Change the advert. We put in place that SLAs, and we need to get to candidates really quickly. We made sure that the approach was very friendly, was very, that first impression was like, hi, how are you? Thanks so much for applying. Tell me about why you've applied, and make sure that that's a more of a memorable experience, managing the communication. But the biggest thing we did was we changed the place where they interview. And now where they interview, you don't go down a long corridor. One, there's a much better reception sign, but you don't go down a long corridor. You go into a separate room, and in that room, they've got products around, and they've got team photos of their team events, because they are really good as an employer, but it's not what they were telling candidates when they're interviewing them. So now they've got a photo frame of different team events. They've kind of got this lovely environment. It's really comfortable. They've got water in the room. They've got a clock where the interviewer can see it without having to obviously look at their watch. They're just things we did. And now their acceptance of offers is probably the highest of any of our clients, because it's a sales process. They are selling themselves to you, hoping that you're going to be their next employer. But we have to say, this is a reason to come and join us. So the more information you can give, the more reasons you can give them to join, the better. So would you take the job if it took 2 weeks for the employer to respond to your application? Or if the first telephone screen was hurried, the employer hadn't introduced themselves properly, the first interview kept you waiting for 20 minutes, and the second asked you the same questions as the first? You hadn't really got a sense of what they were looking for. The interview was basically held in a cupboard. the offer was emailed to you, but no kind of congratulations, no warmth to that message. It's easy for somebody to compete with that kind of process. So we need to kind of try and make sure that we give ourselves the best chance of people accepting the role. So be mindful of the candidate experience at each touch point. So what are they learning about you? What are you saying about your culture and what you stand for? Communicate about the process and the timing so they know what's expected. I think it's really tough on candidates. So, if you've got a full-time job already and then you're trying to fit in times for interviews, don't want to be seen to kind of be taking that for granted. If they're investing time, we need to recognize the fact that they're investing time, they're taking their holidays, or they're having to try and get out of work or work late or whatever to be able to do that. So it's respecting that that's the kind of the investment that they're giving as well. Send them information to read in advance. So whether you say, oh, why don't you check out our website or look at these blogs, or if you can send them this kind of information, it makes for the interview process to be far more interesting, because yes, they should already do their research, but you can really have a much more kind of decent conversation about how they feel about what you do and how you do it. Create an inviting interview space. So just be thoughtful about where are you going to interview. Does that mean you're going to constantly be interrupted? Is it particularly noisy? Is it comfortable or not? Because they will go away with an impression of you from that meeting. And there's a way in which you can try and optimize that. Demonstrate your products or services, your team activities, awards. You could bring other people from your team into that process for them to talk about what it's like being an employee in your company. What does it feel like? Or if you have people that have progressed, how can you help kind of demonstrate in the process? Because fundamentally, you want every candidate to want the job so that you get to choose. You don't know, even if they are not the perfect candidate, you don't want them walking away having a negative view of your brand, because their best friend might be your next best hire. So making sure that it's a really positive experience for everybody. It takes time and it takes discipline and energy, but it's well worth it, because your acceptance rate goes up, but you also are having an impact just generally on the perception of your brand from those that have shown interest. So we always want to be in the position where we get to choose.
Sandra, just at the beginning of that part,
yeah.
You said it was something which really, really struck you. You sort of agitated you. I can't remember exactly the right word you used for that. It all seems fairly kind of common sense, but is that the part which really aggravates you or surprises you, is that businesses don't set up that arrangement? Is that the bit which gets to you?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think sometimes the lack of kind of almost interest in the process, the lack of time investment, it can come across as quite arrogant. Like sometimes brands that no one's really aware of because they've never come across it before, almost like, well, they should want the job, they applied for it. But life doesn't work like that. Like it's a two-way sale, and we have to make sure that we're giving the appropriate time and helping people to understand who we are as an employer, to try and help them make the right decision. So some of these things, particularly the first couple, are really common sense. Move things quickly, respect people's time. I mean, those things should be obvious, but they often really do get in the way, because as business owners, we're manic busy, and we're already possibly a person down when we're trying to hire, and therefore there's the tendency to rush and not give it due time. But we pay the consequence for that. So it's frustrating because some of it's common sense, and it's easily fixed. But then there are also these pieces around assessment and behavioral profiling that just make all the difference. Okay. So, I think it's trying to make sure that we're very considered about what is the right process, and we have to block in the time. Otherwise, you'll just waste your time and theirs.
Thank you.
So be intentional with each stage of the hiring process, to be very mindful of what it is you are telling them. How are you informing them as much as what are they telling you? So that each stage you are gathering more insight. You're trying your best in how much time do we invest in each candidate? I don't know, maybe say it's 2.5 hours. How much can you find out a person in 2.5 hours? And being able to gather as much information as possible does take a bit of discipline and forward planning to make sure that you're able to gather that information in a really smart, slick way, that's hopefully kind of relatively enjoyable for the candidate, although always a bit scary. What are you assessing at each stage? versus what success would look like in the role. So if someone's in, you're interviewing them, they give you certain answers. What do those answers mean? And sometimes people go through an interview, you speak to the hiring manager when they come out and they go, yeah, well, they were good, but I'm not really sure. And it's just left hanging. It's like, so being mindful of that, of exactly what it is you're looking for. And even if that's mainly, if it's a job that doesn't require lots of experience, then it's about that potential. How are they demonstrating the potential? How are they demonstrating the approach that's going to be such a good cultural fit for you, that's going to work really well with your customers or your clients? There's still ways you can try and test that potential. And behavioral profiling is still, a core piece of that. So you just want to make sure you've kind of got all the tools you can to help give you the best chance. So, questions? Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of clever questions. Hi, Sandra.
Yeah. Hi, Yuki.
So you mentioned earlier on that we should aim to respond to applications within 48 hours.
Yeah.
But I've been in situations before where I've put out the job and it has a closing date of, say, 3 weeks' time. And in the first week, I will get some applications that are a maybe. They go into my maybe pile. So I'm not automatically contacting them to say, come for an interview because I'm not sure about them yet. I want to wait until I get all the applications in and then make a decision. But that
Yeah.
means leaving them hanging for longer than 48 hours. So how would you deal with that?
So I'm in exactly the same process at the moment. So we are hiring for somebody at the moment, and I've had about 25 applications, I think, in the last couple of days. But I've got an automated personalized response to say, thank you. We've got your CV. We're just reviewing those. What we're hoping to do is that for those that have moved to the next stage, we're going to be doing interviews next week. So we'll come back to you at this time frame to let you know whether that's something we can progress with you. But at least they've heard from us. It's been a warm, personalized response. They've heard back from us. Because otherwise, I did have somebody that applied yesterday, and then she contacted me within about 20 minutes and said, I haven't heard yet. So, okay, that's not going to happen. But the more that you can respond to people, if you are doing it, say you're doing it through Indeed, you can do the automatic rejection email where they haven't met the filters that you're looking for. So I think it's sorting out a system of how do you go back and reject people if they're not what you're looking for, so that they've had an answer and then on your case. But getting a warm email to those that you think they could be, your maybes, getting an email to them to say, thank you so much. We appreciate your time in applying for the role. This is what we're doing now. So they kind of go, oh, okay, they've got it. That is already a positive experience, because candidates now are very used to just not hearing anything. Any warmth you can give at that stage is going to help.
Yeah. Okay. So like a warm holding email.
Yeah, and some kind of indication of when they are going to hear, whether it's a positive or a negative response at that point. But what we're going to do is we're going to be, looking at all the CVs on this day, and therefore we should be able to come at you by then. People just appreciate that even. So it's just being able to know that they're waiting. And so any indication we can give of how long they're going to be waiting for is going to be appreciated.
Great. Thanks. Sorry, I'll just let the dog out because it.
No,
the other.
I can remember, Sandra. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, sorry, DISC profiling.
Yes.
The DISC profiling. So presumably that's a paid thing.
It's a paid thing.
Yeah.
They cost for an interviewing insights report, which is about 12 pages. Which gives you 3 paragraphs of what the behavioral characteristics are. It gives you ideal interview questions. It gives you their behavioral profile, so like the chart, the bar chart, and it gives you what kind of role they play in a team. That costs about £50.
Okay.
So when you think about most people that are advertising for a role are probably paying about £15-20 a day on advertising. If when you get down to 3 candidates and then you invest in behavioral profiling, that's a good use of money, because you'll find out so much from that. Literally, when we do DISC profiling, we do it with lots of clients. When people read the first 3 paragraphs of their DISC report, they go, oh my God, that is me. I've never seen it in black and white before. That's me. That's how I tick. And so that just for a hiring manager to sit and go, okay, this is how they work. This is how they tend to approach situations. Could just be just so useful, so useful. I'd never hire without it. So yes, paid service. You need to know what you're looking for, but yeah, only do it at the final stage, so you're not kind of wasting money. Only at the kind of that final stage.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
I might have missed this at the beginning due to the fire alarm, but the one thing which just kind of pinged back into my head was, do you suggest, is there any benefits for looking at anybody's social media profile?
I kind of steer away from it. We do sometimes just do a general search to see whether they are currently in kind of any kind of disputes or have recently been to tribunal or things like that. We do look at that kind of thing. But I tend not to advise to go and look on socials. You can go down such a rabbit hole with things like that. I think it can lead you down into a whole other area of risk. So I tend not to.
Thank you. No, I think it makes sense. I can remember going for one interview when I was interviewed by the boss. Then the number 2 came in, then number 3 came in, and I ended up with 7 of the team.
Oh my goodness.
The whole of the team is a small business interviewing me all in one go. And I can remember thinking, well, that was a bit strange. But the boss had a bitter lemon tank top and wore clogs. And I thought, I'm never going to work with somebody who wears clogs. And I worked with them for 6.5 years.
That's brilliant.
It was just these kind of mixed messages coming through. And I was thinking, again, it's for me going in for the interview and for them. They sort of said, well, you were good. So we thought we'd take the opportunity of getting everybody in the team to come and meet you.
Yeah.
Just did it in one fell swoop. But just like, well, who are you? Oh, here's another one. Here's another one.
Yeah.
Different, but
yes, indeed. Yeah. And that does happen, doesn't it? Sometimes people say, oh, actually, whilst you're here, you can just meet so-and-so.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that they kind of understand why, and, what that person's role is, what type of relationship they could have with them if they're going to be successful. Can be really, really useful, and best use their time rather than saying, well, now come back again, and now come back again, and now come back again, and they use up their whole holiday entitlement on multiple interviews. But it's interesting, that point around, you got an impression from what the boss was wearing. We all do it, don't we? And so the more that we're mindful of that as interviewers, of what impression we're creating, and making sure that we are not scribbling notes constantly and not making eye contact, those things that, the ability for you to be able to properly have a conversation, engage in that conversation, look at the whites of their eyes. You can then see their body language. You can see where they're getting really, animated about something, or where they kind of glaze over. The ability to be able to tune into that can really help you be able to work out where someone's talking about real strengths for them, or whether they're just kind of giving answers. So, the ability to be able to hire, it's not a natural skill for many people. It does take practice. So yeah, it's something to be able to kind of really think about and give due thought to.
And as much as I ended up with 8 people, I suspect that you probably have another colleague next to you to help as well.
Yes, yeah, and from a bias perspective, having 2 people in an interview can help to prevent any unconscious bias, because people tend to, and this has been proven through scientific research, people tend to hire people that are just like them. However, if you're hiring somebody to do your finances because you're not very good at doing your finances, the last thing you need is another one of you. So having 2 people in the room can really help you afterwards have a good debate about what it is you heard, what you've picked up on, challenge each other on that, so that you are getting kind of the maximum value from that interview. And you can kind of play different roles. One person can be more focused on one angle than the other, so that you kind of are covering different bases. But yeah, can be helpful a little bit. But a huge panel interview of like 7 wouldn't be great.
No, I would never recommend that to anybody.
Absolutely.
Sandra, I have a really quick question, just to pick up on something you said, and I think there's just a million social media posts about it as well. Sort of that post-interview feedback. way to navigate that, especially because obviously you mentioned if they're not your ideal client, or they may know somebody who is, or equally if maybe they are an ideal client but just not for the role they're currently interviewing for. How do you kind of maintain that relationship, I guess, going forward, so that they have that kind of good perception of your company?
Absolutely. And that's really changed, hasn't it, Robin? I think in the last even 18 months, there's a much greater, higher expectation, if you like, of candidates wanting immediate feedback, which I think really puts a manager on the spot. I always advise that to try not to go into too much detail at that point. We need time to digest it. And so I'll say, I appreciate that you want the feedback, and it was a really fair point. I'm going to go, what I want to do is go away and have a really good think about it, so I can give you really constructive feedback, and then discuss next steps. So I'm going to go away and digest this and speak to my colleague if I've interviewed with somebody else. So, but what we'll do is we'll come back to you tomorrow or whatever. So they know they're going to get the feedback. And I appreciate why, sometimes if people invest hours in an interview process and then they never hear anything, that's pretty soul destroying, isn't it? And that is what's happening a lot at the moment. So but I think being able to give them constructive feedback is more important than just giving them random feedback at the end when you haven't had time to think about it. So I'd say respect the fact that they're asking, and say that there's a number of really great things they've talked about, but you want to go away and have a real good think about it so that you can give them constructive feedback and then explain how you're going to do that. But equally, sometimes if somebody sends in an application and you've got 200 applications to go through, and they're nowhere near the fit for the advert, and you've been specific in your advert to say these are things you need, then you can say you didn't meet the criteria of the advert. And sometimes people say, "Well, can I have some more feedback?" No, I haven't got time. They need to be applying based on what you've said in the adverts. I always say you need to live within a certain distance and you need to be CIPD qualified, and then people apply without them. I'm not going to be giving lots of feedback. So difficult one to manage though.
That's really helpful.
Brilliant. Sandra, thank you so much for your time, and appreciate you're not necessarily feeling 110% as usual. But thank you so much for that. I mean, I think I'm sure Robin himself has got loads of questions and follow-ups. And as Robin is here, goodness knows how Robin ever actually decided to join us, because I don't think I followed any of those steps.
It was a great interview. It was a great interview.
But there's some terrific points there, and so thank you very much for your time. Fantastic work. We will be hosting this on the Chamber website, so this will be free for members to watch on a regular basis if they need to, or any point. But I think it's increasingly challenging environment to making the right appointments, whether it's actually for staff, part-time staff, freelancers, contract work. The same ethos completely applies, because any form of relationship that you have in business needs to have this kind of mindset of really, what do you need? What do the other people need? What are the combinations that you're looking for? Are incredibly important, because nobody has the time or resources at the moment, bluntly, to kind of keep zigzagging to try and find the right answer. It takes up a lot of time, and I think the good businesses like Sandra and her team do get it right, and I think there's a lot we can learn from that. Sandra, thank you so much.
Welcome.
And we shall speak to you very soon. And
thanks everyone so much.